Welcome to Real Life Mentoring, where we explore real life issues to help you make an authentic difference in the world.
Hi, we're Chris and Christina with Fahrenheit Real Life Mentoring. And today we're going to be talking part one of a three-part series on a tool that we call My Life, My Story. Did I get it right? My Life, My Story. Sometimes I say My Story, My Life.
When I wrote it, I decided to say My Life, My Story. I don't know why, but
Very good.
so it's my life, and so I've got a story to share about it.
Very good. So today we just want to introduce the tool to you and why it's important when you're getting to know someone in a mentoring relationship or any relationship for that matter, why it's important to know their story. And so we're going to introduce it today. And then in two subsequent podcasts, we're going to pick apart the tool. And Chris is actually going to use me. He's going to be the mentor. I'm going to be the mentee. We're going to model for you what that looks like. So by way of today, let's just get started with the basics of the tool. So why the title, My Life, My Story?
Well, let me begin with a question.
No, I ask you a question.
Well, I'll answer it with a question. How's that? How old were you when someone allowed you to tell your whole story? Did someone sit down with you and say, Christina, I'd like to know you well. I'd like to know your story. When was that?
I don't know that anybody has ever asked me that.
I didn't do that when we were dating. I actually didn't. Isn't that
No.
interesting? If I could back up
Shocking.
time, I would have done that. I'd say,
If I could turn
Christina, let's
back
take some time. Yeah, you can sing later. Let's find out each other's stories.
Sure.
Because all I knew were a few basic things currently going on with you. I knew that your dad was in the Air Force, but it just would have been a lot more beneficial in our dating relationship, our friendship, had I known your story and you known mine.
Well, and before we disintegrate, like, why didn't we do that? I think we all do that, right? We don't intend or we don't use those words, hey, tell me your story. But we do in bits and pieces over time as we're investing in a relationship. We do
We actually do that.
allude to those.
The difference is being intentional. I would have been
Sure.
more intentional of knowing your story sooner.
Right.
And vice versa.
Very
so,
good.
you remember what your question was you had
Yeah.
for me?
Why the title? Why my
Why the
life,
title?
my story?
Well, when I look at the tool is based upon your past, your present, and what you hope for the future. And all of those three areas are connected. They're intertwined. It's not a straight line. Life doesn't work that way. So
Sure.
my life involves all of those things. And then I cannot explain my life to you without sharing my stories with you.
Sure.
Because life is made up of many, many stories, some small, some much larger, some painful, some exciting, some fun, and a lot of dull.
Right.
Everyday life, everyday duties or whatever,
Okay.
responsibilities.
Again, in the next two podcasts, we're going to talk about the specifics of how do you start, how do you walk somebody through this tool. And I think it's important up front to say this is not a 30 or an hour-minute conversation over coffee where you're
Not
like,
at
let's do
all.
this tool, and then you set it aside. So explain how to use this tool, the benefits of the tool.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is I have the privilege, when I hear someone else's story, I have the privilege of getting to know them well. And when someone is allowed the privilege to tell their story, they feel known and they feel cared about and they feel heard. And when you have that, those are great ingredients for a good friendship, a good relationship to begin. And so as far as mentoring is concerned, it is about getting to know another person so that you can speak into all areas of their life. So it makes sense, wouldn't it, as a mentoring tool that I would want to hear your story so I would be maybe better capable of speaking into the different areas. Does that make sense? So to simplify mentoring, get to know a person. Have a cup of coffee. Take a walk. Take a drive somewhere. Go on a weekend retreat somewhere. Have them over at your home. And just start asking questions. And so the basic thing here is that we want to get to know people well and that they feel known and cared about.
I'm going to read a statement that you have included in this tool, and I just want to read this for
Okay.
those listening. It's important to stress that in order for our lives to truly matter and to be healthy, we must recognize the hand of God through Christ in our lives. He is what gives us a real foundation to live on. As I assess my own life, I realize that God has been in my past, He's here in my present, and He'll be in my future. This means that I do not live by the world's standards. So, again, maybe you're a first time listener, but we approach mentoring from a biblical standpoint. We're going to always, whether we introduce a tool, we talk about a story, our base is that we start from a biblical worldview. So, as I read that statement that you had actually written, that it's Christ who gives us a foundation, where he's been in the past, he's with us right now, he'll be in the future. Is there anything else you want to add to that I guess, from the standpoint of this tool?
The first thing that comes to my mind, so let me, as an example, God is always with us. He's always been with us. He always will be with us. But I knew as a young boy, when I came to Christ and received salvation, at some point I really felt the presence of God in my life. Mm-hmm. So when I was 10 years old, I believe, I began, what's fifth grade is what age? Maybe 9 or 10?
Sure.
I could have been 9 or
Yeah.
10. Let's say 10. All right. That's when I began public speaking. Mm-hmm. I had this desire, even though I was a shy, reserved kid, I had this desire to do speeches. And so we had this club called 4-H. Mm-hmm. And you had two options. You could either raise some kind of farm animal like a pig.
Oh, which I'm sure you
I love that
on.
idea. We had no money for that, no place to put the animal, and I had no desire to do that. Or you could you could give speeches. It seems like
It's one or the other.
one or the
Too
other.
far extremes.
So I was a speech boy, and yet I was terrified of the thought of doing that. But I had this desire inside of me. Mm-hmm. So I began working on the first speech, and locally at our school, I got the blue ribbon and a medal, so I got first place. I thought, that's pretty cool. So that sent us to the next level where you meet with other schools, and the same thing happened. So I shared that with you. So I saw God in my past. Mm-hmm. As I look back now, that was my past.
Okay.
That is my past. I had no idea what I would be doing for a living. Mm-hmm. As you guys know, I do a lot of talking.
Yeah.
Probably sometimes too much. I talk for a living in mentoring and giving, I don't know. I just talk a lot, as you can see.
What's your job? I talk a lot.
I talk a lot. But so currently in my present life, I am a mentor. Mm-hmm. And I talk and I listen all the time. And I'll look back to the past where I felt God say, this is a niche for you. Mm-hmm. And so I would push through. And even though I was nervous and fearful of being in front of people, to where I am today. Mm-hmm. And he'll do the same thing in my future. Mm-hmm. Does it make sense?
Yeah. So when we think of this tool, I think of this tool is really a very good life assessment, right? When you look at, like you just did in your past, wow, I had a desire to speak then. It's what I'm doing now. It's a strength that I find that God uses now. And based on our past, we're assuming that's what God is going to use in your future. But so we do, it's a very good life assessment. But again, going back to, it helps another person maybe draw some connector points from when I sit down with you and you tell me your background from your past. I may not can identify with some of the aspects,
sure.
But man, maybe some feelings of insecurity or feeling abandoned or feeling joy in a certain area, I can connect to those, but it helps me understand you better.
Okay, let's say I was struggling today or had some questions about maybe a career change, mm-hmm. All right? Mm-hmm. And you began to ask me, let's say you don't know me, and you asked me things about my past, and mm-hmm. you would ask me a question, something as, Chris, what's something you enjoyed doing as a boy?
Sure.
Well, based on the story I shared, mm-hmm. I said I enjoyed learning how to give speeches mm-hmm. because I learned how to do it. It gave me confidence. And as a mentor, you might be able to do what and connect that how. Mm-hmm. What would you say, do you think, based on that? It could be something like, okay, Chris, you enjoyed public speaking as a boy, and I'm assuming you've learned to get better at it over the years. And say, yes, I've had different opportunities to do so. Have you thought about a job where you would use your voice a lot? Well, no, I hadn't thought about that. You go, why not? I don't know. But looking back at your childhood, what are some things that stood out to you mm-hmm. that you loved, that you enjoyed doing, you were good at? Mm-hmm. So had you asked me, Chris, what was science like for you? I would say, I'm sorry, what? Science. I remember having a science class. It did not click for me. Mm-hmm. There wasn't enjoyment in it. I didn't understand it. Probably I could have learned more than I did, but I could look back and say, okay, I'm probably not going to go into some area of science today at this point in my life,
Sure.
not based on how I started out with science as a kid. Make sense?
Right.
So the connecting point is what I'm trying to say.
So it's a two-way street. So when we sit down with a mentee and we ask them, sometimes I lead with, okay, you were born, and then what?
And then what?
And people look at you like, what? Are you kidding? You want to know? Yeah. So asking somebody's story is huge. So you're gathering information, but they're also in a process of, wow, I never really thought about that before. But it's not about finding their strengths or weaknesses. It's about experiences that, because we operate from a biblical perspective, right? We do believe what the Word of God says in Romans 8:28, that God works out all things according to His good purpose. So when I talk about maybe in my past some childhood trauma, or as a young woman, a certain issue that I struggled with, to see how that has affected me today, the good and bad and the ugly, we get to engage with our mentee about God's hand, God's fingerprints all over their lives. So what if we're mentoring somebody who's not yet a Christian? Can you use this tool in their life?
Well, does everyone have a life?
Yeah,
You may have been told to get a life. You already have a life.
Sure.
Do you have a story?
absolutely.
It can be used with anyone.
Exactly.
And the difference as a Christian, I can see the thread of God throughout my life.
Sure.
One thing I want to add before I overlook this. So when I have a mentor go over my life with me, my past, my present, and especially we're looking at the future, but especially the past, where I am today, some things like this can be pulled out. Why I may struggle in certain areas. I may have never thought about this. When you've grown up in a home the way you have, that is normal for you,
Sure.
right? You may,
Whether it was normal or not.
right, it wasn't
Right.
normal many times, as you and I have talked about our childhoods, but it was normal for what we knew.
Sure.
Then you grow up, you get away from your original family's home, and you see things from a different perspective. You meet people with different lives, and you may see, wow, that wasn't so normal. However, unless I really reflect back on my past, I mean, a lot of it, not just the negative aspects, but even some of the good things,
Sure.
it will help me understand better why I may struggle in certain areas. Like, why is that an issue for you?
Sure.
It helps me to see why I view myself the way I do. An example would be this, and we'll get into it on the other podcast more, but when a father or mother does not affirm their child, that's building a foundation.
Sure.
That's their past. Now, we're guesstimating here, of course. Is that a real word, guesstimating? I've been told it's not.
I don't think so, but whatever.
Estimating or guesstimating? Look, you guys check into that for us, if you would.
We're
But
supposing.
We're supposing. All right. What are some possibilities of how they may see themselves today?
Yeah, it can go the gamut, right? We've seen it, right? People can just go, I never got this as a kid, but man, I believe this about myself, and be strong. Or probably more often it's like, ooh, I didn't get affirmation so I'm always going to maybe struggle with a little bit of self-doubt, or that feeling of being the underdog, not really measuring up.
Yes, I had this mentality. Well, that's just how we are in our family. Other people are different than us. We're just that way.
Sure.
That is such an ugly lie from the enemy. I say the enemy. So we have God, and there's the enemy, Satan, and so there's a constant battle in my mind for control. And thank goodness I say, okay, God, I need you as my Father, because going back to that question I asked a few seconds ago, something happens in my childhood, which is now my past, and if I'm not careful, if I'm not aware of it, it could still be controlling me today.
Sure. That's one thing that we want to point out, that the tool itself focuses on your past, your present, your future. But the biggest portion we find of where a lot of time is spent, where a lot of aha moments kind of come out, is in the past. And we define past as anything that happened as of yesterday, right?
Yeah.
But we often settle in on those childhood, early adult years, depending on the age of your mentee. It's worthy to spend a lot of time in our past, because most of us we're on a journey of dealing with past hurts or those things that shape us, but that's also where people can get stuck, is in their past. And for the person who's listening to this going, okay, why should I listen for the next two podcasts? Tell some benefits of what you've seen in your own experience of taking somebody through this tool and what it's done for them. Do you have a personal story or insight of somebody you've worked with and how this tool has really helped them?
Without sharing a name, I met with a young man several years ago, and I began to ask him to share his story with me. Mm-hmm. And it starts out, when you meet someone on an airplane or in a meeting for the first time or at church or wherever, they ask things like, oh, what's your name? Where are you from? Mm-hmm. What do you do?
Yeah.
Those are good questions to ask to give you kind of a starting place. But this tool goes far beyond those areas, those questions. So when talking with this young man, it was a bit of a dance because he was nervous. He wanted to be mentored, but he didn't really know what it meant. He thought, in fact, he told me, Chris, if you'll give me 2 or 3 sessions, he called it sessions of mentoring, I think I'll be good.
Yeah.
And I wanted to hit him in the back of the head and said, young man, you don't have a clue what we're talking about. But after meeting, I think the first or second time, he realized these are not sessions.
Sure.
This is a potential relationship that could deeply impact my life. So back and forth, getting to know different aspects of this young man's life. I found out aspects about his family, some good things, and some really sad and painful things in his family's life. Fast forward, now, we were a unique situation. I tend to be very assertive and intentional as a person, as a mentor. This young man was being very intentional with me, so we both were headed toward moving forward quickly.
Sure.
We'd been talking back and forth and spending time together. And as we had these different conversations, it went deeper and deeper and deeper. At one point, I remember he called me and said, now, I know we're going to spend the day together and get to know each other even more, but I want to tell you, when I arrive at your house, I want to tell you the worst thing I've ever done. Wow.
Yeah.
And then think about that statement right there compared to, hey, where did you grow up?
Right.
Texas, wherever. I'm going to tell you the worst thing I've ever done. And it actually grabbed me. It made me nervous. I said, okay, hold on. He was going to tell me on the phone.
Yeah.
I said, please don't tell me.
Yeah.
I want you to know that you know you're supposed to tell me this. And unfortunately, it took my brain to many places.
Sure.
If someone told you that, if I said, I'm going to tell you the worst thing I've ever done.
Serial killer. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I'm thinking, did you murder somebody?
Yeah.
Do I need to report you to the police?
Right.
My brain went to the other extreme.
Sure.
He arrives at the house, opened the door. Okay, I got to tell you. I said, do not tell me yet.
Yeah.
We're going to take a ride on the subway. We were living in an international city at the time. And I knew it'd take about 30 minutes to get to where I wanted to take him. And it was in like a park area.
That's agony for him.
Probably.
Anyway, go ahead.
But I thought, he's got to know that this is right.
Sure.
We talked about, whatever on the subway ride. And then we get to this park area, and he goes, I got to tell you. I said, okay, sit down. And he sat across from me. Now, keep in mind, we'd been meeting for several weeks.
Sure.
We were both intentional in learning about each other's lives,
Right.
really growing in this friendship and this mentoring relationship. And I said, okay, tell me what's on your heart. And he told me, and what he said wasn't good. It was negative, but it was nothing like I'd imagined.
Sure.
But then he begins to weep, which really touched me. And I said, why the tears? He goes, it feels so good to be able to tell another man something like this has been on my mind and my heart for probably 7-8 years.
Sure.
And I realized I'd been given a gift that day. So you go, well, how does this tie into this tool?
Sure.
That's a part of his past.
Right.
He didn't share it in the beginning, but because of asking him about the surface level things of his past,
Sure.
and we would go deeper, and I'd find out currently what's going on in his life, and that relationship began to build and to grow and strengthen. He grew confident to be able to say, I don't want to hold on to this by myself.
Sure.
This man I can trust now because of a simple mentoring tool.
Sure.
And so he shared with me at the time the worst thing he'd ever done. And I wanted to hug him and slap him at the same time,
Yeah.
going, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That's what it is. But I
Yeah.
didn't say that.
Sure.
But it was so heavy for him.
Sure.
That's another point on this. As people are sharing their stories, sometimes they feel so heavy for that person.
Right.
But to us hearing it, it may not be heavy.
Sure.
And I'm thinking, that's not that big a deal. Obviously, we never want to say that.
Right.
Right?
Because we've said this before, but we everything that we do is from a biblical standpoint. And I love that this tool really lives out the verse where it says, bear one another's burdens, right? Where there's things in our past that if we just get them out and expose them to the light, then a mentor then can go, okay, well, let's just jump on this. We get to show the unconditional love of Christ. We get to help bear their burden. We get to point them and encourage them to Christ, who has all the answers with whatever that is that they're going through in the past.
I guess as we wrap up, let me share in a simple words here.
Yeah.
This tool will help assess someone's past.
Gotcha.
Okay. Help them balance the present, have an understanding of it, and prepare for the future.
That's great.
Now, those are simple statements. It takes a lot more work than that.
Yeah.
But it's a simple statement to say, hey, it's a great tool to get to know someone and to help someone go beyond where they currently are.
Well, and that's a good segue to end this podcast. So, just as a reminder, today you've learned sort of the overarching themes of why my life, my story is such a great tool to use. In the next two podcasts, we're going to actually lead you through what that might look like. You can expand that to fit you, your personality, the needs of your mentees. So, again, we are so grateful that you chose to tune in today and as you gain mentoring tools to impact lives. So, thanks again. We'll see you next time. We want to thank you, as always, for listening. If today was helpful, if something that you listened to was helpful, we would really love it if you would go to Apple or Spotify, leave us a review, download, subscribe, and for all things related to podcast, if you'd like to give a financial contribution to help us continuing bringing this sort of broadcasting to you, just go to FahrenheitMentoring.org.